Afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. So as Lori mentioned, today we will be covering the National Transit Database 2023 reporting changes as a result of Federal Register notices. As a quick disclaimer, the contents of this presentation do not have the force and effect of law and are not meant to bind the public in any way. This presentation is intended to provide clarity to the public regarding existing requirements under the law or agency policies. Grantees and subgrantees should refer to FTA statutes and regulations for applicable National Transit Database requirements. The goal of the webinar today is to review the changes to NTD report forms and new NTD policies and requirements as a result of the 2 Federal Register notices finalized during 2023. Today, we're going to start with our general reporting changes, and we'll start with covering the WE20 weekly reference form. Then we'll move on to the general transit feed specification or GTFS requirements for fixed route modes. Then we'll cover the new B15 form for geospatial data for demand response modes. We'll then cover a fuel type requirement change for rural and asset reporters. Then we'll cover emergency contact information, which is a new requirement. Then we're going to jump into safety and security reporting changes, where we will cover reporting assault on transit workers and fatalities that result from impact with a bus on a new form called the SNS 60 form, which will apply to reduced, rural, and asset-only reporters. So here is the contact information for the FTA IT Help Desk. And this is where you can contact the help desk for any technical assistance needs. And then we also have our NTD reporting help desk, which is for non-technical assistance needs, where you can contact your analyst, or if you're unsure of who your NTD analyst is, you can email this ntdhelp@dot.gov. Okay, so like Lori mentioned, today I'm joined by Matt Bonzak, our Chief Quality Assurance Lead for the NTD team. And again, my name is Melissa Conti, and I work on supporting the NTD team in both the rural and urban modules. So now we have our contact information for the new NTD program manager, Chelsea Champlin. And we also have Tom Coleman, who is the previous NTD program manager, who now serves as the Division Chief of Analysis at FTA's Office of Budget and Policy. So Chelsea and Tom's contact information is here if you need it. Okay, so today's webinar, like I said, will focus on 2 Federal Register notices that were finalized in 2023. So the first was for regular or annual related reporting changes, and the second was specific to safety and security reporting. These Federal Register notices were proposed in 2022 and then finalized in 2023 after the notice and comment period. If you need to access any NTD-related Federal Register notices, you can use the link at the bottom of this slide for a page on our website that has these 2 Federal Register notices that we'll be covering today, as well as any historical Federal Register notices that relate to NTD reporting. So I encourage you to use that link if you need to. We have all of them listed there. And hopefully you all can hear me. I can try moving a little closer to the microphone. Hopefully that helps.
It sounds fine to me.
Okay, I'll try to stay close to the microphone to hopefully help whoever's having issues with audio. Okay, so first we're going to cover reporting changes that are related to regular NTD reporting or anything that's non-safety and security related. We'll cover that at the end, but we'll start with our regular reporting changes first. The first requirement that we will cover is the WE20 weekly reference reporting requirement. So the Federal Register notice created a requirement for a monthly submission of weekly data for a sample group of agencies who report to the NTD. The weekly data is intended to provide a timely snapshot of service and ridership at the national level. This will be collected on a new form called the WE20 Weekly Reference Form, and this will begin in July of 2023 for any agencies that were selected as part of the sample group. Agencies who were selected in the first WE20 sample group have already been notified, and this group consists of around 400 reporter modes. This sample group, per the Federal Register notice, will submit weekly data on a monthly basis for a 3-year period. After those 3 years are over, in 2026, FTA will resample for a new WE20 sample group of agencies. Now we'll review the data that's required for the WE20 submission. For each month, FDA will determine a reference week in which agencies in the WE20 sample group will be required to report the weekday 5-day total for vehicle revenue miles and unlinked passenger trips, and the weekend 2-day total for vehicle revenue miles and unlinked passenger trips provided during that specific reference week. Reference weeks will typically be the second full week of every month, unless there is a federal holiday. Data for each reference week is due 7 business days after the reference week ends. Given the uniqueness of the van pool mode, if van pool modes are selected as part of the WE sample group, agencies may report VOMs or vehicles operated in maximum service instead of vehicle revenue miles and unlinked passenger trips. The data on the WE20 may be preliminary or minimally validated. FTA encourages the submission of best available data at the time that it's due and understands that these data may not be finalized at the time of submission on the WE20 form. WE20 reporting is not intended to replace monthly ridership requirements for full reporters and will not be used to compare to annual reported values on the annual report. Monthly ridership submissions for our full reporters are tied to annual reporting, but the WE20 weekly reference reporting will not be tied to the annual report. It will remain a separate form module in the NTD reporting system. I'll mention this a couple of times throughout today's presentation, but today's presentation is meant to cover the policy and requirements changes. We will have a webinar later this summer that will cover the form changes in more detail with screenshots and step-by-step how to work through the new forms that we talk about today. So you will have a chance to see those for any of the new forms we talk about today. As mentioned, agencies that were selected for the first WE20 sample group have already been notified. Agencies may request exemptions from the WE20 requirement if they have structural constraints that prevent them from complying, such as contractual agreements or requirements with purchase transportation or PT providers. The reference weeks for the remaining months of calendar year 2023, starting in July, are shown here in the table at the bottom of the slide. And the agencies who were selected as part of the sample should already have these reference weeks and due dates. They will also be published in the upcoming 2023 NTD manuals. And at some point this fall, we will also publish the reference weeks for calendar year 2024. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Matt, who will discuss the next reporting changes.
Hey, thank you, Melissa. So the General Transit Feed Specification, or GTFS, is a common format that allows public transit agencies to publish their transit data in a format that can be consumed by many software applications. So basically, it's designed to allow trip planning apps to help passengers access schedule information. So for example, if you use Google Maps and you ask Google Maps, how do I take transit from my house to work? The reason that it's able to do that is because that transit agency that you're riding has a GTFS feed. Since GTFS is already widely used, FTA is adopting it to meet the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, BIL, requirement to collect service area information. So agencies with fixed route service must report GTFS links to the NTD starting in report year 2023. Each fixed route mode type of service combination will require a link to the mode's GTFS data. We understand that GTFS feeds often don't differentiate between NTD modes and types of service, so you're not required to do that. It's okay if the link for different modes is linking to the same feed. So that would be fine. And this requirement will apply to full reporters, urban small systems, rural reporters, and tribal reporters, but not to reduced asset reporters. So for fixed route modes, the link submitted must be static and not password protected. So that means the link has to not be broken. If you change the website that is hosting your GTFS feed, then you'll need to provide a new link. And not password protected, meaning it has to be open to the public. People using public web browsers have to be able to access it. After the initial submission of the required links in report year 2023, agencies will be required to certify their GTFS links every report year through the CEO certification D10 form. So we encourage you to keep your GTFS feed as up to date as possible. So for example, if you update your schedules quarterly, we encourage you to update the GTFS feed quarterly as well. But the requirement is to update it at least once a year to make sure that when you submit your annual NTD report, it is up to date at that time. In the NTD reporting system, there will be a portal that you can use to update links for each mode and type of service, which will be similar to the current National Transit Map interface. Some of you may have already submitted links to NTM in the past. Next slide, please. Thank you. So GTFS is essentially just a series of text files. So it's pretty low tech from the creation end. So the required text files are called agency, stops, routes, trips, stop times, and either calendar or calendar dates. So your GTFS feed will have to include those files. The webinar that we're presenting today is not intended to be a full tutorial for what these are. We'll give you some links to learn more about these specific files on the next slide. But I also want to mention feed info and shape are other files that can be part of your GTFS feed, but they're not required. All of these can be created in any spreadsheet program except for the shape file. Shape involves geospatial data, so it's a little more complicated, which is why it's optional. We don't have any requirements about where the link is hosted. It can be on your website. It can be, for example, on your state DOT website or some other public repository. So we don't care where it is as long as it's publicly accessible. Here are some resources that we think are going to be very helpful. These are provided by RTAP, the Rural Transit Assistance Program, but FTA is making it available to both rural and urban agencies. The first link takes you to something called the GTFS Builder, which is a tool that consists of 2 Excel files, and it's designed to help you create the GTFS text files that you would need. The second link takes you to some support resources that RTAP has provided, basically helping you to use the first link, helping you to use the tool. In addition, there's a weekly office hours that RTAP is providing every Thursday from 1 to 1:30 Eastern time, where you can log on with them and ask any questions you want. You can do screen shares and they can walk you through things. So I encourage you to use that resource as well. So that's how the BIL requirement will be met for fixed route modes. For demand response modes, that doesn't really make sense because, of course, they don't have routes and schedules. So the way that we're meeting the requirement for demand response modes is in the form of a questionnaire. And so beginning in report year 2023, demand response modes will have to provide details on geospatial data through this questionnaire. It'll be for each mode type of service that is demand response. There are 10 questions, and the questions may change based on the answers that you provide. So I'm going to walk through what those questions are. First, do you serve residents in another state besides your state? Second, select the counties that you serve, either in whole or in part. So we'll have a list of all the counties in the nation that you can select from. Third, select the census places that you serve within those counties. Census places are locations that are defined by the census. They may be incorporated towns, cities, they may be unincorporated, but the census has the complete list of them. Fourth is your demand response intended to meet the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, complementary paratransit requirement for a fixed route system. Most of you are probably familiar with ADA and the requirement to provide paratransit if you provide fixed route service. So the fifth question is, if you answered yes to number 4, then are you providing paratransit for fixed route service provided only by your own NTD ID, or are you also providing paratransit on behalf of other NTD IDs? And if so, what are those other NTD IDs? Sixth question is, within your service area, do you have different passenger eligibility requirements or different terms and conditions of service? So for example, maybe within one city, you only provide paratransit, but in a different city, you provide service to the general public. 7, how many days per week do you operate? And really 7 and 8 are sort of the same question. For each day of the week, what are your hours of operation? And is your service open to only ADA passengers, another specific segment of the population, or to the general population? 9th, what is the minimum advanced reservation time for your service, days or hours? Most of you are probably familiar that there are a lot of microtransit services that have a reservation time that's much shorter than traditional paratransit. And then 10th, what is the base fare charged? And so through these 10 questions, FTA is going to collect the information about geospatial service location that's required by the BIL. A couple more changes that are coming to annual reporting that I think should be a little bit less new, hopefully a little bit easier. First of all, the A30 is the revenue vehicle inventory form. And on that form, we're going to start collecting fuel type for rural, tribal, and reduced asset reporters. So urban reporters already report fuel type for their vehicles, but we're extending that requirement to other reporter types as well. So now everyone who reports vehicles will have to report whether they use gasoline, diesel, CNG, etc. And then the final change to the annual report has to do with an emergency contact. Basically, during the pandemic, FTA found that for some agencies, it was difficult to contact someone with whom they could coordinate on pandemic response. And so FDA is going to start collecting one emergency contact person from each agency. That person can be an existing NTD user, but doesn't have to be. And ideally, this should be a person who is affiliated with emergency preparedness or response functions, such as an emergency liaison officer, a facility or building emergency response team member, or something along those lines. And FDA is going to contact this individual in case of emergency in order to facilitate communication between FTA and the agency. Agencies will certify or update emergency contact information as part of their annual kickoff, starting in report year 2024 and each year going forward. But of course, we do want you to keep this up to date at all times. We're just only going to require certification once per year. So now I'm going to hand you back to Melissa, and she's going to talk about changes to safety and security reporting.
All right, thank you, Matt. All right, so there were 2 federal register notices this year, and there was one specific to safety and security related reporting requirements. So we're going to cover those next. And these do affect both full reporters and reduced rural and asset only reporters. So we did host another webinar earlier this year for assault on transit workers. So for our full reporters here in the group, I will refer you back to that webinar as it had more detail for full reporters. So I'll cover that in just a bit. But we do have other resources for our full reporters since there's more reporting forms related to safety and security reporting for that group. So the first new requirement for safety and security reporting is reporting assaults on transit workers. So the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or BIL, requires the NTD to collect all assaults on transit workers, whether there is an injury or not. NTD is adopting the statutory definition of assault on a transit worker, which is a circumstance in which an individual knowingly, without lawful authority or permission, and with intent to endanger the safety of any individual, or with a reckless disregard for safety of human life, interferes with, disables, or incapacitates a transit worker while the transit worker is performing their duties. The respective forms were updated for full reporters in the beginning of April of this year. The presence of an injury or lack thereof will determine where the event should be reported, either by form type or form section for our full reporters. This change is in effect for commuter rail operations as well, which is a change. And this means that commuter rail, Alaska Railroad, and other hybrid rail modes will now complete monthly SNS 50 summary reports, in addition to the major events that they already report. As I mentioned, April 2023 was the effective date for data collection and will be the focus of our validation efforts for our full reporting group. These changes will begin for reduced rural and asset only reporters or reduced asset reporters in report year 2023, so starting this fall. There are 2 terms we use to collect assault on transit workers, and this classifies the assault as physical or non-physical. In a physical assault, an assailant makes physical contact with the worker and may use an object, weapon, or projectile to do so. Projectiles may include bullets, any liquids, an assailant's saliva, or any other substance. In non-physical assaults, there's no physical contact with the worker, and these could be things such as verbal threats, harassment, or interference with a worker's duties. An example of a non-physical assault could be interference with an operator's ability to continue service by refusing to get off the vehicle when asked. Like I mentioned, full reporters with monthly safety and security reporting requirements will see these changes on their SNS 40 and SNS 50 forms. Since that's a monthly requirement, you should already be seeing those changes in your forms. And our SNS team held a webinar specific to assault on transit workers earlier in April of this year to review these specific changes in more detail for our full reporters. So if you are a full reporter, I encourage you to review the recording of that webinar on NTI's YouTube channel, and then contact your SNS analyst for any specific questions you may have on how to capture the assault on transit workers in your SNS 40 and SNS 50 forms. The rest of this presentation for safety and security reporting will focus on reduced reporters, rural reporters, and asset-only reporters. For our reduced rural and asset reporters, you will see a new form in report year 2023 called the SNS 60 form. The safety section of the reduced reporting RR20 form will be removed, and you will report all safety and security data on this SNS 60 form. Reduced rural and asset-only reporters will be required to report assault on transit worker data, including physical assaults and non-physical assaults, and also report all other reportable safety and security data similar to the events previously reported on the RR20 safety section. You can disregard the last bullet point of this slide, that is a typo. For asset-only reporters, other safety and security data will apply to our asset-only or reduced reporters beginning in report year 2023. On the SNS 60 form, the reporting applicability and thresholds are as follows. So reportable events should only be reported if they occur on transit right-of-way or infrastructure, at a transit revenue facility or maintenance facility, during a transit-related maintenance activity, or any event involving a transit revenue vehicle and meeting a reportable threshold, which I will cover in just a moment. You should exclude any events that occur at bus stops or bus shelters that are not on transit property unless someone is boarding or alighting a transit vehicle. You should also exclude any events occurring off transit property where the affected persons come to rest on transit property. So the reporting thresholds for the SNS 60 for major events include a fatality, including suicide within 30 days of an event, an injury requiring immediate medical attention away from the scene for one or more persons, estimated property damage equal to or exceeding $25,000, collisions involving transit revenue vehicles that require towing away from the scene, either the transit vehicle or other non-transit vehicles, and lastly, evacuations for life safety reasons. So these 5 reporting thresholds should be familiar to our reduced and rural reporters who have previously reported this information under the safety data section of the RR20 form. Here is a comparison table of pre and post BIL reporting elements. So as you can see for our reduced rural and asset-only reporters, in addition to reporting major events, injuries, and fatality counts, if you were reporting on the RR20, you will also now report assault on transit workers. And those will be broken down by physical and non-physical, which we'll cover in just a moment. So agencies will continue to report these on an annual basis, which are due 4 months after the end of your agency's fiscal year. So the SNS 60 form that will collect information on assault on transit workers, as well as major events and other safety and security data, will be part of your annual report package if you are a non-full reporter. Second piece of the Federal Register notice specific to SNS reporting is for fatalities that result from impact with a bus. So our non-full reporters are now required to report additional detail on fatalities that result from impact with a bus. The SNS 60 form will include fields for specific counts of collisions with pedestrians, collisions with vehicles, and collision with other, which may be things like an animal or a manhole. Then there will be a field for other major events, as we covered above. So anything that is a fatality, injury, property damage of $25,000 or more, those 5 criteria that you should be familiar with. And there will also be a new field for injuries related to non-major events. So that information related to major versus non-major events is a new requirement for our non-full reporters. Our full reporters should be familiar with those distinctions. So this is a new element on the SNS 60 form as well. An example of a non-major injury or event may be injuries that are not a result of a collision, evacuation, or a security event, as mentioned above. This is a screenshot of the SNS 60 form with sections to record the count of physical and non-physical assault on transit workers. So there will be 2 sections at the top, one for physical assault and one for non-physical assault. Assaults will be reported based on whether or not the worker was an operator or an other transit worker and where the assault took place. So across the columns, there are assaults that took place in transit vehicles, revenue facilities, non-revenue facilities, or other locations. For any assaults on transit workers, you must report an injury, fatality, and major and non-major event counts where appropriate. So this is in addition to capturing the other safety and security data. This is the assault on transit worker section at the top of the SNS 60 form. So next we'll cover the bottom portion of the safety data section for the SNS 60 form. This is where you will report the count of major events, fatalities, and injuries for collisions with the 3 categories I just mentioned, and then any other major events, which would correspond to what you used to report on the RR20 form. And then the last field is for total reportable injuries from those non-major events. The RR20 data section, safety data section, is here on the bottom of this slide. So this is what reduced rural reporters used to report, but you will now see the SNS 60 with the assault on transit worker sections and the all other reportable safety and security events. So this last screenshot is for asset-only reporters. The bottom section of the form is not shown here, but this will show up the same way as the SNS 60 for reduced and rural reporters. You will have the 2 sections for assault on transit workers, physical assault and non-physical assaults, and then you will have the all other reportable safety and security section at the bottom. So as I mentioned before, these screenshots are what we had available for this specific form, but later this summer for the report year 2023 changes and clarifications webinar, that will be more of a step-by-step slide presentation of how to fill out each of these forms with more screenshots from the forms that Matt and I mentioned today, such as the WE20, the B15 form, how to submit your GTFS data, and a step-by-step more in-depth review of the SNS 60 form. So this presentation was meant to go over policy requirements, but we will have a more in-depth technical assistance presentation later this summer that will walk you through what these forms will look like when you get into the NTD system. So I do encourage you to attend that webinar as well as a follow-up to understanding how you will enter this information and what it will look like on your forms. That wraps up the presentation for today in terms of new requirements as a result of the Federal Register notices. Again, here is the contact information for the NTD Help Desk. So we're still open 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Time via email at ntdhelp@dot.gov. You can contact Matt or I with any questions about today's presentation, as well as your assigned analyst, if you are a direct reporter to the NTD. If you need help finding out who your analyst is, you can feel free to contact Matt or I or the help desk above. And I think we have plenty of time to go over some questions that were coming in. So
Yeah, do you want me to read them, or how do you want to? I could just go in order.
We can go in order.
Okay, so I'm going to back up to the oldest one that's in the queue here. It's from Aiden. It says, for VP, will it be VOMS for weekday and VOMS for weekend separately, or is it for the entire 7-day report week?
Sure. So I believe it is 2 fields, one for weekday and one for weekends. But when we have that in the presentation later this summer with the step-by-step of how to go through the form, we will show that version of the WE20 form.
Great. Priscilla asks, will data from WE20 forms only be published annually?
Sure, so that's a great question. I don't think at this time FTA has made a decision on how frequently WE20 data will be published. So as we get more information on that determination, we can follow up with Priscilla about that question. But at this time, I don't think it has been decided the frequency in which it will be published.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm typing at the same time, probably clacking. I should turn that off. An anonymous attendee said, well, I'm not sure what this was referring to, because it says, is this a link to the zip file or the page where it is hosted? I'm not sure if that was.
I think this is related to GTFS
Okay.
requirements. So I think this should be a link to the page where it is hosted.
Okay.
For the GTFS link, yeah.
If that wasn't the right question, Claire, please come back and clarify. Aiden says, in regions where there is a regional GTFS feed incorporating the service of multiple NTD reporters, would that meet this requirement, or must the feed incorporate only service reportable by the agency reporting the GTFS feed?
So it's a good question. I believe you will be able to submit GTFS feeds that include multiple providers, as long as it is clear which services you are providing. So if you have a regional GTFS feed, as long as it includes all of the service your agency is providing, that should be sufficient to meet the requirement.
Great. Jonah asks, does the GTFS requirement include rural deviate fixed routes?
Yes, it does. So if you report a fixed route mode, which includes deviated fixed route or MB, CB, commuter bus, motor bus modes, you will be required to meet the GTFS requirement.
And Priscilla, how is FCA going to distinguish between static GTFS and GTFS RT?
That's a good question. I am unsure of the answer to that. Matt, do you have anything to add? We can look into that one in terms of how those two items would be distinguished.
No, anything that's still open, it's because I wasn't able to answer it by typing. So no, we'll have to look into that further.
Okay.
Okay, well, the nice thing about the Q&A is that we have who asked the question and which questions need follow-up. So we'll be able to provide that answer to anyone interested and the person asking, I believe. Aiden asks, does the emergency contact need to be a single person, or could the contact be for a position such as, quote, emergency operations center director, which might change depending on whomever is present in the EOC?
I believe it does need to be a single person, but I can double check with how that will be presented in the reporting system. My current understanding is that would be, just like any other user role where it's particular person, email, phone number, contact information, but I can look into that one further.
Does assault include internal employees?
So I'm not sure what you mean by internal employees, but if they are an employee of the transit agency, then yes.
Okay, from Kevin. For purposes of assault reporting, do transit workers, oh, well, this is a similar question, include administrative office staff, just more specific? Same question.
It is anyone that works for the transit agency, but you would want to make sure that it meets the reportability in terms of where the event took place. So there was a slide about, you know, what events are reportable depending on where they're taking place. So I would, you know, transit workers do include everyone that works at the transit agency or contractors working on behalf of the transit agency. But in terms of if it's taking place in an administrative office, I believe you'd need to review the thresholds to determine what's going on in that situation, determine if that would make it reportable or not.
Okay. How will the reporting be for DR, ABA, and microtransit?
Yes, I'm not clear if this is, I'm assuming this is related to the B15 geospatial data. So for each demand response mode and type of service that your agency reports, you will have a section of those 10 questions for each mode and type of service combination. But if you, so it would depend on how your agency is reporting those modes. If they are reported separately, if they have different types of service, you would have the 10 questions for each. But if they are just reported under DRDO as a whole, then you would include the data for that within the 10 questions for both services.
Great. We're reporting towing whether or not someone has been transported to a medical facility, correct? And do we, I'm having trouble. I mean, I know it's typing and there's typos. And do we only have agency-owned vehicles or include subcontracted vehicles? When reporting?
So for the major events, if the collision results in towing away of a vehicle, that can be either a transit vehicle, which would be agency owned, or if you have a contractor that's using vehicles, that would still be, they're using that vehicle to provide transit service. So that would be included as well.
Melissa, do you remember saying a slide had a typo? Because someone asked which slide that was and I couldn't answer that.
Yes. Let me go ahead and pull that up. Hold on one moment. That was on slide 27. At the bottom, it states that reduced asset and asset subrecipients only will have the section for physical assault and non-physical assault on the SNS 60. That is not correct. They will have both the assault on transit worker sections, physical and non-physical, and they will also include the other reportable safety and security events section.
Okay. You took your share down. Did you mean to?
Oh, apologies. I put that back up. Okay, hopefully that works.
Yes, there we go. The next question is from Angie. Did you say that a passenger refusing to deboard is now considered an assault? Just checking that they heard correctly.
Yes, that would be an example of a non-physical assault, as the passenger refusing to deboard the vehicle is interfering with the transit worker's duties. So that would be a non-physical assault if no contact is made, but they interfere with the worker attempting to provide service and complete their transit worker duties.
So San Joaquin RTD, I guess, was following up the other question we just answered, and they're talking specifically about spatial data. And let me see if I can find the question that do you remember? Because I
think this was for the microtransit and ADA demand response service. So the answer to that question was whether or not you'll have a B15, those 10 questions Matt went over, per mode and type of service combination. So it would depend on whether or not this agency has their microtransit service reported separately from their normal paratransit services, depending on whether it's directly operated or contracted out. But if they are under the same mode and type of service combination, it would be reported together.
Kevin asks, as July is coming up fast and it's vacation season, is there any date or tentative dates for the class on the WE20 forums?
Sure. So if you are selected as part of the WE20 sample group, you will receive a step-by-step guide with screenshots of the WE20 form prior to the July due date. So your analyst will reach out with that document to guide you through how to complete them. And then later in the summer, after the July, I believe it's usually in August, is when we would have the second report year 2023 changes and clarifications webinar with more screenshots for all of the forms talked about today. But Kevin, if you were selected as part of the WE20 sample group, your analyst will be following up before the July due date with a guide on how to complete that for the first month.
Okay, from Homer, we also need to know if the GTFS link can be to GTFS RT or not.
I am unsure of the answer to that question, but that's one I can look into and get back to you on what it will accept.
Okay. Okay, I could have answered this. The Q&A section, usually people have to email me and ask for a copy. We don't usually post it unless, Melissa, do you know if that has been emailed? Because I know when Anne was doing the last round of webinars, I think she said there might be a plan to email it out to everybody, because I did send her the list of everyone who had logged in. So do you know if that's something that's being done on your end, or?
I think there was discussion of sending it out, but I'm not sure if she has completed that yet. But I can, if you have a specific question and answer you'd like to review, we are working on updating our frequently asked questions pages with the new Federal Register notice topics to make sure that frequently asked questions are reflected there. So we'll try to make sure that that's updated.
Okay, and also feel free to reach out to any of us and ask, and we can work to get you a copy if you need it or want it, basically. For WE20, if the ITS software did not finish processing the weekly data within the 7 business days, can we request an extension?
Yes, so if you are unable to comply with the 7 business day due date for the WE20 reporting, please contact your analyst and let them know if you won't be meeting that due date. And if that is something that would be ongoing, that you can't meet the 7 business day, you'll need to communicate that to your analyst so we are aware of it. So if you are a part of the WE20 sample group, please feel free to reach out to your NTD analyst. If you need help figuring out who that is, you can let us know and we can help put you in contact with them.
Okay. Kyle, following up on a previous question, if a regional GTFS has multiple NTD reporters and they operate under one agency brand, making it impossible to distinguish each reporter's service in the GTFS, then NTD FTA needs each reporter to post their own separate GTFS.
Yeah, I mean, I can look into the specific example of this if you could provide the NTD agency and regional agency brand, but they do need to be distinguishable when you provide that link. So it's okay if the link has multiple providers in it, but we would need to be able to see which routes and stops are, correspond to which NTD reporter.
Is the WE20 reporting form asking for total unlinked passenger trips recorded in the reporting week, or only the UPTs that are recorded in the random trip samples?
This would be total unlinked passenger trips recorded within that reporting week, within the reference week.
So I think this is a reference to what you were talking about earlier. It says, my mistake, you're talking about our NTD analyst within the NTD agency, correct?
So every agency that reports to the NTD is assigned an NTD analyst from our team, from the NTD operations team, who is there to assist you with completing your NTD report forms and packages for the corresponding years. So that's what I was referring to there as your NTD analyst at the NTD team.
Next, what are the consequences of not complying to reporting on WE20 in time?
Sure. So if agencies do not submit the WE20 on time, they will receive an automated late notice through the NTD reporting system, and their analysts will follow up to determine when they'll be able to complete that WE20 for the specific month.
And right now, Mandy says, I tried to look up TubTube on assault on page 13B, and it says not available anymore.
Yeah, I'm not sure if my link was outdated, Lori. That was for the YouTube webinar recording for the assault on transit workers.
For the ones that we just had, or?
Yes. Yep. So the one that we had back in April, I had just provided a link to it. So some of our full reporters, since that webinar went more in depth for full reporters, just using that as a resource. So it looks like someone said that link was working for them.
Yeah, I didn't pull anything down. That's why I'm trying to find out specifically.
Yeah, if it's slide 26, I just tested that link and it worked for me.
This is page 13B, but that's not a slide number, so maybe it's included in something else. What would 13B? Mandy, if you're listening, can you clarify where you had the problem? Because if it's with the YouTube page, I need to know about that as well. Okay, well, we'll hold on that because I'm not sure. I'll fix it if I know where to go and fix it, if it needs fixing, obviously. Are there any consequences on funding? But I'm not sure. Are they talking about not completing that report in time, or I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm assuming that's related to WE20. I am unsure of any consequences for not complying with the WE20 reporting. Since it's not tied to the annual report, I do not believe you could receive a failure to report warning for the WE20 reporting, but we would encourage you to comply with the requirement if you are chosen to be part of this group.
I think we can say something stronger than that, which is that all agencies that receive 5307 or 5311 funding are required to comply with all of FTA's reporting requirements, and failure to do so can jeopardize your eligibility for FTA grants.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
Okay, we have 2 minutes, so I'm trying to get in as many questions as. If the WE20 data doesn't have to be statistically accurate and can be based on estimates, how will data, scroll away from me, how will data quality be used by the FTA analysts?
Sure. So we will be comparing WE20 data, over time for what you have submitted for WE20 data. In terms of how it will be used by FTA and others in the industry, I don't have the details on that, but it's get a more timely snapshot of what is going on in the transit industry, outside of monthly reporting. So I don't have specifics on how it will be used by FTA analysts. But in terms of NTD reporting, for what your NTD analyst will be looking at, we'll be looking at month-over-month changes from your WE20 submissions.
Okay. Do we have to extrapolate trip ridership based on missing, thrown out records, or can we just report on what we have?
Sure. So I think it would depend on what you're using to submit your WE20 data. I'm not sure if this is related to APC collection, but FTA is encouraging the best available data you have at the time of submission for that due date.
All right, we have 1 more minute. From Gordon. What if a natural event, i.e. hurricane, occurs for WE20 week and we are supposed to report it? Is there a note we can add to explain service interruption?
Sure. So I'd recommend that you contact your analyst if you have anything going on like that during the WE20 submission, and let them know if there's anything that will impact your ability to submit that information. And if you have any details on decreases, increases in service, you're more than welcome to provide that to your NTD analyst.
Okay. Does the P10 form emergency contact only require 1 contact from the state or 1 contact from each state subrecipients included in the annual report?
That's a great question. I have to confirm that before I can respond. But I will get back to you on that because I know that will affect a lot of state DOT reporters. So I'll confirm the details on whether it's required 1 per state or 1 per subrecipient, and get back to the attendee.
Okay. So we're at the hour mark. There's 7 open questions and they keep coming in. So do you want to answer a few more, or do we have a hard stop? Should we just end it and then follow up individually, or have people contact you, or what do you think? I'm free to continue answering questions for a couple more minutes.
Couple more minutes. All right, let's keep going. Again, Melissa, do you remember the slide that had the typo? Yes, slide 27, the last bullet point. Slide 27, last bullet. Okay, from Homer. So then I've heard the word for the new weekly, I've heard the word sample. Is the data reported coming from a sample we have to do similar to the annual reporting? It's my understanding that we just use the total ridership, miles, etc. from our collection systems and not a sample. Sure. So the data you're submitting for the WE20 is not a sample. The reason why we refer to it as the sample group is because it's a subset of NTD reporters. So FTA sampled all NTD reporters for a sample of about 400 modes to be selected as part of the group, the sample group that has to comply with WE20 reporting requirements. So that's what we're referring to when we talk about the sample group. Slide 13 with the schedule shows reporting only 1 week's worth of data per month. We're not reporting every week of the month? Sure. So for WE20 reporting, you only report data on 1 week per month. So it's a monthly submission of 1 week's worth of data. If you are a full reporter, you may have monthly ridership requirements. Those are going to be separate from the WE20 weekly reference reporting. Mandy's earlier question was referring to the full reporters slide. I think, let me see if I can find her question. We were just answering that. I have to scroll back here. Yeah, I think that was for the YouTube link. Yeah, so that is still working for me, Mandy. If you're on a work computer, it may be that YouTube may be blocked for you. I've run into that a couple of times with some agencies I've worked with. So I would just maybe try opening it in a different browser or on a different device. Yeah, maybe when you're home, or I don't know, try your phone even. Where can I find the notification or documentation of federal funding impact for not reporting WE20? Sure. So in all of our FTA's legislation on complying with NTD requirements, those are documented in the legislation. So recipients of Chapter 53 funds have specific NTD reporting requirements. In terms of the actual impact to your federal funding, that's handled at the FTA level, not at the NTD level. But I would encourage you to review the Federal Register notices and FTA legislation on complying with NTD reporting if you are a recipient or beneficiary of Chapter 53 funds.
Yeah, the legal requirement is in 49 USC 5335, the requirement to report to NTD. And so all NTD reporting requirements are under that jurisdiction.
Okay, I'm just answering something. That was actually the last open question. There were 73 questions or things entered in there, which is, I think, might be a record for a webinar that I've run. There is one more question in the, oh wait, they keep coming in. Oh boy. Well, what time is it? It's 5 after. There's 3 more questions. I think if we answer these, then that's it. We have to cut it off. Okay. Does that work for everyone?
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Okay. No, if you any new questions added will have to be answered after the session. So Sarah asks, should we plan to calculate weekly data points to account for annulments, missed trips? Are there any implications for using data from APCs or Farebox?
There's no implications. You can use your APC or Farebox data for WE20 submissions. The data you submit for vehicle revenue miles and unlinked passenger trips, that should represent what you truly provided during the week. It shouldn't be based on scheduled. So you should account for missed trips if you weren't taking those throughout the week.
Okay. In the chat box, Michael wanted to know where we can find the physical and non-physical definitions.
Sure, those should be on slide 25. Yep, and then the assault on transit workers webinar that I linked on slide 26, that has more examples as well, and some more information for full reporters, if that's helpful.
Great. And the last question is sort of a compliment. It says, how did y'all become so smart with the NTD system? They are the analysts for their company, and are there more training courses, I guess, to become more proficient?
Sure. Well, thank you. Lots of practice. But yeah, there are training courses depending on your agency's reporter type. There are training courses held through NTI, usually beginning in August of every year for our urban full reporters. And then we do we had a rural training course last year as well, and there are webinars that you can join if you are a reduced reporter or tribal reporter, depending on your type. So if you're a full reporter, though, I would encourage you to attend the training courses. You can register for those through NTI's website once they're available.
Great. That is the last question we're going to take. I'm going to wrap it up here. Thank you to everyone who participated. Special thank you to Melissa and Matt. It's always nice working with you both. I put a link to a survey eval in the chat box. If you have a chance, please fill it out. If not, I should be sending a follow-up email that will also contain the link. So if you have to run off to another meeting, go and there's another chance. We appreciate your feedback and we appreciate everyone's participation. Hopefully the video will be on YouTube by the end of the week, depending on my schedule moving forward. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you all.